The emergency alarms shrieked through the corridors of Zephyrian Academy, their piercing wails bouncing off the crystalline walls like trapped screams. Director Keltar's 6 eyes darted between the security feeds, each one showing empty hallways where students should have been safely contained in their dormitories. The containment breach wasn't supposed to happen for another 3 standard cycles, but the apex predator had somehow triggered its release mechanism early. How many students are still in the common areas? Keltar's voice cracked through his translator unit, betraying the fear that his rigid exoskeleton couldn't show. Approximately 47, Director, Security Chief Voxnar replied, her tentacles dancing nervously over the control panel. Most are from the lower classifications, but there are several high-priority offspring among them. Keltar's mandibles clicked in distress. The Academy housed the children of the galaxy's most influential species, each one worth more than entire star systems in terms of political leverage. If even one of them was harmed by the creature now stalking the halls, it would mean war between multiple civilizations. The apex predator had been captured 3 months ago from a death world on the galaxy's rim. Standing nearly 2 meters tall, covered in scarred hide that could deflect plasma bolts, and possessing reflexes that made veteran warriors look clumsy, it was meant to be the centerpiece of the Academy's new Predator Studies program. Students would observe it from behind reinforced barriers, learning about apex evolution and survival instincts in a controlled environment. But there was nothing controlled about this situation. There, Vox now pointed at one of the screens with a trembling appendage. Corridor 7, approaching the recreational facility. On the monitor, they watched the creature move with deadly grace. Its muscular form seemed to flow rather than walk, each step calculated and silent despite its size. The beast's head swiveled constantly, nostrils flaring as it tracked scents through the air. Most terrifying of all were its eyes, small and dark, but holding an intelligence that spoke of careful planning rather than mindless rage. Evacuate everyone from that sector, Keltar commanded. Seal the bulkheads and prepare the neural disruptors. But even as he gave the orders, he knew they were too late. The recreational facility was the Academy's largest common area, filled with games, entertainment systems, and, most importantly, children who had no idea death was stalking toward them. In the facility, young Zexley was concentrating on her holographic puzzle, her small Arcturian fingers dancing through the light patterns. Beside her, Mordin practiced his levitation exercises, small rocks orbiting his bulbous head in perfect formation. They were among the youngest students at the Academy, barely past their first molting or growth phase. The first sign of danger came when the emergency lights began flashing. The children looked up from their activities, confusion replacing concentration on their young faces. They had been through drills before, but never during recreational time. "Maybe it's just practice," whispered Jean Ko, a small cetacean whose breathing apparatus bubbled nervously. That's when they heard it, a low sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Not quite a growl, not quite breathing, but something that made every prey instinct in their genetic memory scream in terror. The facility's automatic systems began sealing exits, the emergency protocols treating them as trapped animals rather than thinking beings. The creature appeared in the main entrance like a shadow, given form. It paused there, perfectly still, as its gaze swept across the room full of alien children. For a moment, none of them could move, caught between the instinct to run and the paralysis of pure fear. Then, something unexpected happened. The predator's head tilted slightly, and its nostrils flared not with hunting instinct, but with what almost seemed like recognition. Its dark eyes fixed on a corner of the room where 2 small figures huddled together, and for the first time since its capture, the creature's rigid posture softened. In that corner, barely visible behind an overturned play structure, 2 tiny forms pressed against each other for comfort. They were unlike any of the other students, covered in the same type of hide as the predator, but smaller, more vulnerable. Their large eyes, so similar to their parents, reflected the emergency lights as they watched the massive form in the doorway. The Academy's files had mentioned that the creature was captured with offspring, but those cubs had been classified as non-threatening and placed in the general student population. They were just children, after all, and everyone knew that young predators posed no danger without their parents' guidance. No one had considered what might happen when that parent found them again. The moment stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. In the security center, Director Keltar watched in fascination and horror as the apex predator stood motionless in the doorway. Every tactical program in the Academy's databases said the creature should be attacking by now, tearing through the cluster of vulnerable young aliens with ruthless efficiency. Instead, it remained perfectly still. "Sir," whispered Security Chief Voxna, "the neural disruptors are charged and ready." "Wait." Keltar held up one of his clawed appendages. Something was happening that defied everything they understood about apex predator behavior. The creature's massive head turned slowly, scanning each child in the room with what could only be described as assessment rather than aggression. When its gaze lingered on the cetacean youngster, Gene KO's breathing apparatus released a stream of terrified bubbles. When it studied the young Arcturian, Zexley's bioluminescent patches flickered erratically with fear. But when those dark eyes found the two small figures huddled in the corner, everything changed. The predator's rigid stance melted into something else entirely. Its broad shoulders lowered, and it dropped into a crouch that spoke of approach rather than attack. A sound emerged from its throat, but not the threatening rumble they had heard before. This was softer, almost musical, rising and falling in patterns that seemed deliberate. Dr. Sarah Chun had been studying in the Academy's xenobiology section when the alarms began. As one of only 3 humans in the entire institution, she had grown accustomed to being an oddity among the galaxy's more established species. Her own people had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel, making them the newest members of the galactic community. Now, as she raced through the corridors toward the recreational facility, her human instincts were screaming warnings that her alien colleagues couldn't understand. She had seen the creature's file, had studied the footage of its capture. Something about it had seemed familiar in a way that made her uncomfortable. Humans were relatively new to galactic civilization, but they weren't new to being predators themselves. "Dr. Chun," Keltar's voice crackled through her communicator. "You need to evacuate with the other faculty. The creature has reached the recreational facility." "Director," Sarah's voice was tight with realization. "What happened to the predator's cubs after capture?" There was a pause. They were integrated into the student population. They showed no aggressive tendencies and were deemed safe for socialization. Sarah's blood ran cold. "Sir, you need to listen to me very carefully. That creature isn't hunting. It's looking for its children." In the recreational facility, the standoff continued. The small predator cubs had begun to move, crawling out from behind their makeshift shelter. Their movements were careful, uncertain, as if they couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. The larger predator remained crouched, continuing its strange musical sounds. The other alien children watched in terrified fascination as the cubs approached their parent, small hands reaching out tentatively. Young Zexley, despite her fear, found herself studying the reunion with scientific curiosity. Her people were known for their analytical minds, and, even in terror, she couldn't help but observe. The way the large predator's muscles relaxed, the gentle manner in which it touched the cubs' heads, the protective way it positioned itself between them and the other children. "It's not going to hurt them," she whispered to Mordin, who was still maintaining his levitation exercises purely through nervous energy. "How can you tell?" the young telepath asked, his mental shields flickering with stress. "Look at its posture. My mother studies animal behavior, and she says body language is universal. It's protecting, not hunting." But their whispered conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching security forces. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors, accompanied by the high-pitched whine of charging energy weapons. The predator's head snapped up, instantly alert. Its eyes darted between the main entrance and several smaller exits, calculating escape routes with predatory efficiency. But every potential path would require leaving the cubs behind or exposing them to danger. The creature's dilemma was written clearly in its movements. It could fight its way out easily, but not while protecting its young. It could hide, but there was nowhere in the facility that would conceal all three of them. And it could surrender, but its experience with these aliens had taught it that surrender meant separation from its offspring. As the security forces took positions outside the facility, the predator made a decision that surprised everyone watching. Instead of choosing fight or flight, it did something that no one expected from an apex predator. It looked directly at the other children in the room and made a gesture that was unmistakably communication. One massive hand pointed at the cubs, then at itself, then made a sweeping motion that encompassed all the young aliens present. The message was clear, even across species lines. These are mine, as yours are yours. Dr. Sarah Chun burst through the security cordon just as the tactical team prepared to storm the facility. "Stop!" she shouted, her human voice cutting through the electronic chatter of alien languages. "You're about to make a catastrophic mistake." Director Keltar's image flickered to life on her portable communicator. "Dr. Chun, you are in violation of emergency protocols. Return to safe distance immediately." "Director, that creature isn't a mindless predator. It's a parent. And if you attack it while it's protecting its children, you're going to trigger a defensive response that will endanger every student in that room." Sarah could see through the facility's transparent walls as the standoff continued inside. The predator had moved to position itself between its cubs and the security team's likely entry points, but it hadn't made any aggressive moves toward the other children. If anything, it seemed to be trying to keep them out of harm's way. "Dr. Chun," Keltar's voice was strained, "you're suggesting we negotiate with a Class A apex predator." "I'm suggesting," Sarah replied firmly, "that we're dealing with a sapient being who wants exactly what any parent would want, to be with their children and keep them safe." She took a deep breath and made a decision that would either save everyone in the facility or get them all killed. "I'm going in." Dr. Sarah Chen's hands trembled as she overrode the security locks on the facility's secondary entrance. Behind her, she could hear Director Keltar's frantic commands echoing through multiple communicators, ordering security teams to maintain their positions while simultaneously demanding her immediate retreat. She ignored them all. The door hissed open with mechanical precision, and Sarah stepped into the recreational facility. The first thing that struck her was the absolute silence. 47 young aliens and one massive predator, all frozen in a tableau of mutual assessment. The creature's head turned toward her with fluid grace, those dark eyes fixing on her with an intensity that made her human survival instinct scream. But Sarah had spent years studying predator behavior on Earth, and she recognized something in that gaze that her alien colleagues had missed. Intelligence, calculation, and underneath it all, desperate parental concern. "Easy," Sarah said softly, raising her empty hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." The predator's nostrils flared as it processed her scent. Its head tilted slightly, and Sarah realized it was studying her with the same careful attention she was giving it. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, one of the cubs made a small sound, a tiny whimper that cut through the tension like a blade. The predator's attention snapped back to its offspring, and Sarah saw something that confirmed every suspicion she had harbored. The creature's expression softened completely as it looked at its children. This wasn't a mindless killer or a rampaging beast. This was a parent who had been separated from its young and was now desperately trying to protect them. "You're scared," Sarah said quietly, taking a single step closer. "You don't know who to trust, and you think we're going to take your babies away again. I know what it means to protect the ones you love." The predator remained motionless, but its breathing had changed. The rapid, shallow pants of stress were giving way to deeper, more controlled respirations. It was listening, evaluating, trying to determine if this strange new alien represented threat or opportunity. Dr. Chun, Keltar's voice crackled through the facility's communication system. You have 30 seconds before security moves in. Sarah's jaw tightened. 30 seconds to prevent a massacre. She looked at the predator, at its cubs, at the terrified alien children scattered throughout the room, and made a decision that would either vindicate her theory or prove it catastrophically wrong. She sat down. The simple action had an immediate effect. The predator's rigid defensive posture relaxed slightly, recognizing the universal mammalian signal of non-aggression. Sarah crossed her legs and placed her hands palms up on her knees, making herself as non-threatening as possible. You're not a monster, she said softly. You're a parent. And parents understand each other, no matter what species they are. Slowly, carefully, Sarah began to speak about her own family, about her younger sister back on Earth, about the protective instincts that had driven her parents to ensure their children receive the best education possible, about the way her mother had fought the school board when Sarah was bullied for being different, and how her father had worked 3 jobs to pay for her advanced degrees. The predator listened, its head cocked to one side. It might not understand the words, but the emotional undertones were universal. Love, protection, sacrifice, family. Concepts that transcended species barriers. One of the cubs took a tentative step towards Sarah, its large eyes filled with curiosity rather than fear. The parent tensed immediately, ready to intervene, but didn't move to stop the approach. Hello there, Sarah said gently, extending one hand toward the cub. You're very brave, aren't you? The young predator sniffed at her fingers, then made a soft chirping sound that was somehow both alien and achingly familiar. It was the sound of a child seeking approval from a trusted adult. That's when Sarah realized something that made her blood run cold. She looked up at the parent predator, seeing it with new eyes. Oh my God, she whispered. You're not just any predator species. You're human. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. The creature was larger than any human she had ever seen, more muscular, adapted for survival on a hostile world. But the basic skeletal structure, the way it moved, the protective instincts it displayed, all of it suddenly made perfect sense. This was what humanity might become after generations of evolution on a death world. This was humanity's future, somehow transported to their present. Director, Sarah said urgently into her communicator. Cancel the security action immediately. You need to hear this. Dr. Chun, you have 15 seconds before they're human. Sarah's voice cut through the static like a laser. The predators are human beings. In the security center, Director Keltar's 6 eyes went wide with shock. Around him, the command staff exchanged glances of disbelief and confusion. That's impossible, Voxna protested. Humans are a Class C species. No offensive capabilities, limited physical prowess, minimal threat assessment. Look at the genetic markers, Sarah demanded. Run a DNA comparison. I'll bet my career that these are evolved humans from a colony ship that went missing decades ago. The implications were staggering. If Sarah was correct, then the Academy wasn't dealing with a predator species at all. They were dealing with lost human colonists who had adapted to survive on one of the galaxy's most dangerous worlds. And they had just imprisoned a human family. In the recreational facility, the parent continued to watch Sarah with growing recognition. It took a step forward, then another, moving with cautious hope rather than predatory intent. When it spoke, the words were distorted by generations of linguistic drift and physical adaptation, but they were unmistakably human. Please, it said in accented but recognizable English. Don't take my children away from me again. The words hung in the air like a physical presence, cutting through decades of assumptions and fear. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as the full weight of the situation crashed over her. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. It was a tragedy of galactic proportions. What's your name? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The evolved human tilted its massive head, searching through memories that had been buried under years of survival and trauma. Marcus, it finally, said, the word emerging as a low rumble. Marcus Chun. Sarah's heart stopped. Chun, are you related to the colony ship Chen's dream? The creatures, Marcus's eyes widened with sudden hope. You know of the dream? Our ship. It disappeared 40 years ago, Sarah said, her mind racing through the implications. 300 colonists heading for the Kepler 442 system. The Galactic community assumed it was lost to a hyperspace anomaly. Not lost, Marcus replied, his evolved vocal cords struggling with concepts he hadn't needed to express for decades. Crashed. On Zirian Prime. Death World. We adapted or we died. Around the facility, the alien children watched in stunned fascination as the conversation continued. Even young Zexley, with her analytical mind, was struggling to process what she was witnessing. This creature that had terrified them moments before was actually a member of Dr. Chen's species, transformed by necessity and survival. My cubs, Marcus continued, gesturing toward the two small forms that huddled near his feet. Kira and David, born on Zirian, never saw soft world, never knew safety until here. Sarah looked at the young humans, seeing them clearly for the first time. They retained more recognizably human features than their father, suggesting that the extreme adaptations were still recent enough to be partially reversible in subsequent generations. But they moved with the same predatory grace, the same heightened awareness that marked them as children of a death world. In the security center, chaos reigned as the full scope of the situation became clear. Director Keltar was frantically consulting with xenobiologists and legal experts, trying to understand the ramifications of what had just been revealed. Sir, Voxnar reported, the genetic analysis confirms Dr. Chen's assessment. 94% human baseline, with significant adaptive mutations. These are definitely evolved colonists from Earth. Which means, Keltar said slowly, that we have been holding a human family in captivity for 3 months. The political implications were staggering. Humanity might be a young species in galactic terms, but they were also members of the Galactic Council. What the Academy had done, even unknowingly, was tantamount to kidnapping the children of a diplomatic species. Director, came Sarah's voice through the communicator, I need you to clear the security teams from all entrances. Marcus is willing to talk, but he won't negotiate while his children are in danger. Dr. Chun, even if your analysis is correct, the creature, Marcus, is still extremely dangerous. His physical capabilities far exceed normal human parameters. Sarah looked at Marcus, seeing the tension in his posture as security forces remained positioned around the facility. He's dangerous because he's protecting his family. Remove the threat to his children, and you remove the danger. But even as she spoke, Sarah could see other complications emerging. Some of the alien children in the facility were beginning to show signs of severe stress. Jean Ko's breathing apparatus was cycling erratically, and Mordin's telekinetic abilities were sparking uncontrollably as his emotional state destabilized. Marcus noticed it too. Despite his own fear and anger, he was aware of the young aliens around him. Sarah watched in amazement as he slowly moved toward Jean Ko, his massive frame somehow conveying reassurance rather than threat. Small one breathes poorly, he said to Sarah. Can help. Sarah's breath caught. Even in this situation, even while separated from his own children and surrounded by potential enemies, Marcus was concerned about the welfare of other youngsters. Jean Ko's species requires specific atmospheric mixtures, Sarah explained. Stress disrupts their breathing apparatus. Marcus nodded and began making soft, rhythmic sounds, not unlike the musical tones he had used with his own cubs. The young cetacean looked up at him in surprise, then gradually began to relax as the sounds continued. It was a lullaby, Sarah realized, or the equivalent of one. Young Zexley watched this exchange with growing understanding. He's not a predator at all, she said to Mordin. He's a protector. Look how he moves around us, always keeping himself between us and the doorways. It was true. Even while comforting Jean Ko, Marcus had positioned himself to shield the alien children from potential threats. His survival instincts, honed by decades on a death world, had identified the youngsters as vulnerable beings requiring protection. Dr. Chen seized on this revelation. "Marcus," she said, "these children are students here, just like your cubs. They're all someone's family." Marcus's eyes swept across the room, taking in each young alien with new understanding. "Like Pac," he said slowly. "All young. All need protection." "Yes," Sarah nodded. "And their parents are just as worried about them as you are about Kira and David." This seemed to resonate deeply with Marcus. He looked at his own children, then at the alien youngsters, and Sarah could almost see the internal struggle playing out. His protective instincts warred with his broader understanding of family bonds. "Will they separate us again?" Marcus asked, his voice heavy with barely controlled emotion. "My cubs and I." Sarah felt the weight of honesty pressing down on her. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm going to fight to keep your family together." "Why?" Marcus studied her with those penetrating dark eyes. "You not know us." Sarah thought about her answer carefully. "Because you're human. Because your children deserve to be with their parent. And because what happened to your colony, what you've survived, it's extraordinary. The galaxy needs to understand that humanity is capable of far more than anyone realized." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing not just her words, but their implications. Finally, he spoke. "On Zirian, we learned that survival means sacrifice, but also means protecting what matters most." He looked at his cubs, then at the alien children around him. "These young ones matter to someone, yes?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "Then we protect all. We find a way that keeps families together, keeps young ones safe." It was in that moment that Sarah realized they weren't just dealing with an evolved human, but with someone who had developed a wisdom born from extreme adversity. Marcus wasn't just a survivor. He was a leader who understood that true strength came from protecting others, not dominating them. The standoff was far from over, but for the first time since the alarms had started, Sarah felt hope that everyone would emerge from this crisis safely. 3 weeks later, the recreational facility of Zephyrian Academy looked vastly different than it had during the crisis. Gone were the sterile, segregated play areas. In their place, integrated zones allowed students of different species to interact more naturally, with careful attention paid to environmental and safety needs. At the center of it all, Marcus sat cross-legged on the floor, his massive frame somehow managing to look gentle as young aliens clustered around him. His cubs, Kira and David, played alongside their classmates with the easy acceptance that only children could manage. "Tell us about the crystal caves again," pleaded Zex Lee, her bioluminescent patches glowing with excitement. Marcus smiled, an expression that had terrified security personnel weeks ago, but now brought comfort to the Academy's youngest students. "On Zirian, deep beneath the surface, there are caves where crystals grow like forests. But these crystals, they sing when the wind passes through them." "How do they sing?" asked Jean Ko, her breathing apparatus bubbling with curiosity. "Like this," Marcus demonstrated, making a series of harmonic tones that resonated through the room. The children listened in wonder as he recreated the alien melodies of his adopted world. Dr. Sarah Chun watched from nearby, still marveling at how completely the situation had transformed. The initial panic had given way to understanding, then to acceptance, and finally to something unprecedented in galactic education: true integration. Dr. Chun, Director Keltar, approached, his 6 eyes showing a mix of relief and continued anxiety. "The Galactic Council's final ruling has arrived." Sarah took the official document, scanning through the formal language to find the essential information. Her eyes widened as she read. "They're granting Marcus and his children full citizenship status," she said, unable to keep the amazement from her voice. "But more than that, they're recognizing Zirian survivors as a new human subspecies. The children can stay at the Academy, and Marcus has been offered a position as an instructor in survival studies." Keltar's mandibles clicked nervously. "There's more." The Council wants to establish a new program, using the Academy as a pilot site. They're calling it the Integration Initiative. Sarah looked up from the document. Integration of what? Species that have been classified as dangerous or incompatible for standard galactic society. The Council believes that if we can successfully integrate the Xerian survivors, we might be able to reach out to other isolated or misunderstood species. The implications were staggering. For centuries, galactic civilization had operated on a principle of careful segregation, keeping potentially dangerous species isolated from the general population. But the success of Marcus's integration had demonstrated that understanding and acceptance might be more effective than fear and separation. "Marcus," Sarah called out, "could we speak with you for a moment?" The evolved human looked up from his storytelling, gently extricating himself from the cluster of young aliens. As he approached, Sarah was struck again by the contradiction he represented. His physical presence was undeniably intimidating, but his demeanor radiated calm protection. "What is this about?" he asked, his speech patterns having become more refined over the weeks of interaction with Academy faculty. Sarah handed him the Council's decision. Marcus read slowly, his enhanced intellect processing not just the words but their broader implications. "They want me to teach others what I learned on Xerion," he said finally. "Not just survival techniques," Keltar clarified. "Leadership, adaptation, integration. The Council believes your experience could help bridge gaps between species that have never been able to coexist peacefully." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, looking back at the children who continued their games. "And my cubs? They will be safe here. Safer than they've ever been," Sarah assured him. "They're not just accepted here now. They're loved. Look at them." Indeed, Kira and David had formed close friendships with several of their classmates. Young Zexley had appointed herself as their guide to galactic technology, while Mordin was teaching them to communicate telepathically. The species barriers that had seemed so insurmountable weeks ago had dissolved under the simple reality of children playing together. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "The Council wants to organize expeditions to find other lost colonies. Your knowledge of survival on Death worlds could help locate and rescue humans who might still be stranded on hostile planets." Marcus's eyes lit up with sudden hope. "Others survived? Other ships, other colonies?" "We don't know," Sarah admitted. "But if they did, you might be the key to finding them and bringing them home." The evolved human looked back at his children, then at the integrated classroom where species from across the galaxy learned and played together. When he turned back to Sarah and Keltar, his expression showed the same determined protectiveness that had marked his entrance into their lives. "On Xerion, we learned that survival was not enough," he said slowly. "To truly live, we must build something better for those who come after us. If my knowledge can help find lost humans, if my experience can help different species understand each other, then yes, I will teach." 6 months later, the Academy's new integration wing was bustling with activity. Students from previously incompatible species worked side by side, guided by instructors who had once been considered too dangerous for galactic society. Marcus had become the program's most sought-after teacher, his courses on adaptive leadership and cross-species cooperation drawing students from across the galaxy. But perhaps most importantly, 3 rescue expeditions had successfully located and evacuated human colonies that had been presumed lost. Each group of survivors brought new perspectives on adaptation and survival, enriching humanity's contribution to galactic civilization. In the Academy's Memorial Garden, a new monument stood among the traditional markers honoring fallen heroes. This one was different, though. Instead of celebrating victory in battle or scientific achievement, it commemorated understanding. The inscription, written in dozens of galactic languages, read simply, "To the children who saw past fear to friendship, and the parents who chose protection over predation. In differences we find strength, in understanding we find peace." Young Zexley often brought visitors to see the monument, explaining how the Academy had changed since the day a predator had been released and discovered to be a protector. Her favorite part of the story was always the same. The scariest moment, she would say, was when we realized we were wrong about everything. But the most wonderful moment was when we learned that being wrong gave us a chance to be better. And in the recreational facility, now redesigned to accommodate species from across the galaxy, Marcus continued his storytelling sessions. His tales of Zirian's crystal caves and singing winds had become legend among the students, but his most popular stories were simpler ones. They were stories about the importance of family, the power of understanding, and the truth that every being, no matter how different they might seem, was someone's precious child deserving of love and protection. The predator had indeed been released, but what emerged was something far more powerful than anyone had imagined. The beginning of a new era of galactic unity.